Good afternoon and welcome to the Committee on Rules and Administration. My name is Matt OMalley. I'm the chair of the committee and my capacity is President Pro Tempore. Today is Thursday, July 8th, 2021, and we are here for a hearing on Docket 0504, Order for a Hearing to Review Central Staff Policies, Procedures, Performance, and Regulations. This matter was sponsored by Councillor Lydia Edwards and was referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration on April 7th of this year. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at cityofboston.gov or boston.gov/city-council-TV or on broadcast television, channel Xfinity, channel 8, RCN, channel 82, and Verizon Fios, channel 964. Anyone who would like to testify on this matter may do so by emailing the committee at ccc.ra.boston.gov. Once again, that's ccc.ra.boston.gov for the Zoom link, and then we will take you at the conclusion of our panel. Written testimony may also be sent to that email and will be made part of the public record to all available councillors. I am joined by several colleagues, including the sponsor, Councillor Lydia Edwards, as well as Councillor Ricardo Arroyo, Councillor Liz Braden, and Councillor Michelle Wu. Apologies if that wasn't your exact order of arrival best, and curious, I'm going to invite the sponsor for a brief opening statement, and then other councillors may do so, and then we will get into, I believe, our remarkable Central Staff Director, Yolandi Valdez, may kick off some of the panel speaking. So, Councillor Edwards, the floor is yours. Thank you for introducing this topic.
Thank you very much. I'm here not only because I'm a district city councillor, I'm chair of government ops, but I'm also a proud member of the UAW, and I have been a workers' rights attorney for some time. And so I wanted to introduce this and want to have this comprehensive conversation about central staff and every city councilor's staff, who I believe are uniquely vulnerable. They are uniquely vulnerable because they cannot form a union. They are uniquely vulnerable because they're 90-day employees, because they have, at least for central staff, they have 13 supervisors. Every single one of the city councilors is a supervisor of central staff collectively. And of course, for our own internal staffers, we are elected officials, and a lot of their careers and their ability to grow and be in this building is dependent upon an elected official maintaining their employment. And I find that to be, again, a combination for unique vulnerabilities. Now, this body, in many cases, has come out with powerful resolutions standing up for, by, and with workers on strike, workers who are fighting for living wages, workers who are fighting for sexual harassment policies on their own. We have been there all the time, and I think it's time that we are reflective of how things are for the workers who work for us. Most workplaces have a complaint process, a redress process, and anti-retaliation process that are clear and understood. And I don't believe that these workers have those things. Moreover, a lot of workplaces are required to have a list of the rights of workers posted in a common area. Again, I don't know that all workers here have that same protection. You know, other work sites have HR and a person that can either neutrally or navigate someone through the process if they are bringing a complaint. And we don't necessarily have that here. We do have an interesting relationship with the HR of the city of Boston. In 2016, they came and testified about parental leave here. In 2018, in our 2018 policies for sexual harassment and anti-retaliation, they are actually listed as a go-to place for many of our staffers if they have a problem with us as city councilors or each other. And then, of course, there's the rules of 2013 that govern the internal city council staff work rules and regulations, which HR is really not really a part of. And all this to say is it's a real lack of clarity, which means, again, not only are they uniquely vulnerable, but us as supervisors may be unintentionally targeting and creating work environments that are not conducive to truly equitable, fair, safe places, because we ourselves aren't seeing us as supervisors who are responsible for that. So my goal today is to make sure that central staffers understand that we see them, we value them, that each one of the staffers in our offices feel seen and valued as well. And I would like to walk away with a clear process and updated processes that assure that the staff, any staff person that may have a complaint, concern, or feel that they have been abused by any city councilor knows a direct route, knows how that route is going to be played out, and knows that they are protected if they come forward. And that can be, and I want it to be an internal one. They always can go, of course, to the MCAD and other agencies. I also want to make sure that in as much as we as city councilors have concerns about staff performance, we are clear about how we are supposed to bring those complaints, those concerns, how we hire, how we fire, all of that, and how that is supposed to go. And I could tell you right now, it's not absolutely crystal clear in all the things that I have read. I want you to know, to my colleagues, I did invite HR to come here today. I know, of course, with Councillor OMalley, I wanted human resources to be here. And so their response to my office was that they're not involved in any way, shape, or form in our HR policies or dynamics within the city council, which, again, they've testified on policies, they're listed as a person that we're supposed to go to. And quite frankly, I don't think that that's true. I think they have been involved in investigations, and I think they have been involved in back and forth with the council. And I'm disappointed that they're not here to help clarify that, and also to help us build together and understand ways in which all workers feel safe here. So I will just say this, if I leave this with more questions than answers, I will be putting in a 17F that's detailed and is asking them specifically about their roles in the past and roles in the future about how HR is expected to work with this body. So again, I'm here today because we show up every place else for other workers. And it's about time that we acknowledge that our own workers need protections and clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. Councillor, I'll go through now councillors in order of arrival, and wanted to acknowledge we've also been joined by Councillor Kenzie Bach. Feel free to give an opening statement if you are interested, beginning with Councillor Ricardo Arroyo.
Thank you, Councillor, or Mr. Chair. In terms of, I'll keep my statements brief so that we can have sort of a working sort of session in this hearing. But I was under the impression we were talking about specifically our central staff protocol, but it sounds like this is also about our own personal offices. So it's about our own personal staff and central staff, which I'm interested in hearing how we wrap those things in, because there's obviously places where I think, for instance, with the sexual harassment notice that they all have to sign and things like that, there's trainings where they mutually meet, but I'm not sure how deep in the weeds we're going into each person's individual offices and how we structure that. So I'm interested in terms of just that conversation and where we're touching on that. I'm actually very much interested in hearing as well how we go about reviewing work, right? Because we're now July 8th, 2021. I've been here since January of 2020, and I don't think we've had any formal review. I've certainly not been solicited for my review of any individual central staffers' job performance or specific tasks that were conducted or not conducted. And so I think that's something that we should certainly set up, since I know that the Rules Committee is built to do that. And it might make sense for us to have quarterly or regularly, annually or something, sort of review things where we do it back and forth. So for instance, I have certain staff members who report to me how I'm doing with them and vice versa, right? Like we have these yearly check-ins on both persons' job performances with them. So how they appreciate my leadership or how they don't, and vice versa. And so those are the kinds of things that I don't think we do with central staff. I don't know if the central city council president does that necessarily on a regular schedule either, but that might be something that just I can imagine for central staff, it would be helpful for them to have some kind of regularized process for those kind of reviews so that it doesn't seem spontaneous or at a specific time or targeted or any of that, to have sort of regularly scheduled reviews.
Thank you. I'm getting a bit spotty Wi-Fi. Can you, colleagues, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, as long as you can hear me, I may be frozen, but did you want to respond to that, Councillor Edwards? You have your hand up.
Yes, because
Please proceed, and then we'll go to the rest of the colleagues.
just to be clear, the reason why we'd be talking about it's not individual offices, but because the 2018 policy for sexual harassment involves all of those individuals who are employed, it does touch on our offices. So that's where the overlap happens. It's in our own harassment policy. And I still think that that policy needs to be updated.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Braden?
Thank you, and thank you for bringing this issue up. I echo Councillor Edwards. The notion that we're standing up and fighting for the rights of workers, and then we need to put our own house in order in a way. So I welcome that. And as a new councillor who was 10 weeks in City Hall, just adapting to the culture and figuring out how things work, I really value, and I think it'll be valuable for our new colleagues coming on board next year to have some sort of a roadmap to follow in terms of office procedure and how we manage all these various pieces. So I really value the opportunity to dive into this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Wu?
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the sponsor for ensuring that we're having this conversation, and to you, Mr. Chair, for guiding us today as well. I just was here to listen and if I'm able to, as time permits, to offer any perspectives or sort of, I guess, historical background in terms of previous iterations of council presidencies where we did try to institute a performance review and to have more structure to how central staff could be given feedback and therefore also the appropriate recognition and compensation related to cost of living increases and wage adjustments. I think especially with the structure of the council where the council president tends to change over fairly frequently, there's an instability there, and having more codified guidance, whether it is a commitment to ongoing regular performance evaluations and mechanisms for tying that to cost compensation, et cetera, or guaranteed cost of living could be helpful as well. So just here in case any of that information over the last 8 years is helpful.
No, it certainly is, and I appreciate that context, Councillor Wu. Councillor Bach?
Good afternoon, President O'Malley, and thanks to the sponsor, Councillor Edwards, for bringing this before us. I'll just echo everybody. I think the instability that Councillor Wu alluded to, right? It's not an accident. We literally don't allow people to hold 2 terms in a row as council president. So I think as long as that's the council's rule for its own governance, we need to have sort of complementary rules that introduce more stability for central staff. So I certainly found coming in as a new councillor that the kind of lack of standard and model documents to use, I mean, even in sort of creating job offers with my office, I found myself very grateful that I had worked at a large agency beforehand and so had some familiarity with kind of HR protocols from that, but it feels very happenstantial. And I think that having reviewed the council's documents, the ones that Councillor Edwards alluded to, I think both the handbook and the harassment policy could stand some real updating. I think regularization of check-ins of those procedures on both sides for staff and for councillors reporting reporting when there's a challenge, I think is important. And it seems to me, I mean, certainly, Mr. President, one thing I think would make sense from here would be to kind of identify what are the documents that need updating, what are the kind of procedures and schedules that maybe we should be creating, and then, give everybody a little bit of lead time and have a working session where we're really like in the weeds of those documents. Certainly, as a member of the Rules Committee, I'm happy to commit to doing real work on that. But I think I really want to underscore at the start here the point that Councillor Edwards made, that there's just a really fundamental power imbalance between us as councillors and the staff. And also there's a reality that that our lives are public facing and that our staff don't run for office, but then find themselves kind of involved in that dynamic with us sometimes. And so I just think that the onus is really high on us to make sure that we're creating procedures that are fair and that give people a recourse in light of that power balance. So just as usual, very much appreciate my friend Councillor Edwards for this, and definitely am volunteering to be involved in the weeds of some of our document and process updates. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. I appreciate that. The chair now recognizes Councillor Ed Flynn. Thank you for joining us from District 2. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor OMalley, and thank you, Councillor Edwards, for the important work that you're doing on this issue. I apologize for being late. I had another meeting, but I have been following this debate. And what I'd like to add is, I want to make sure, I come down wanting to make sure that the workers here at the City Council Central staff have the most protection that we can provide them, that they're provided with the best training and education opportunities that we can, that we treat them as, treat them with respect and dignity, being there for them, encouraging them. And, certainly the power dynamic, as one of my colleagues mentioned, is there, but the central staff does most of the work behind the scenes, and they don't get the appreciation or the recognition that they deserve. And I think we as city councilors get too much. But I guess my point is we need to make sure that there's protections in place, that central staff workers are treated fairly, know exactly what their job and duties and responsibilities are. And, the politics of it stays out of it. And that we make sure and appreciate them, because at times I think we often overlook them. And then when we often overlook them, that's when major issues come about. So I want to make sure that we have as much protection as we can for the workers who actually do the work, and not just us city councilors who take the credit for the work. Thank you, Councillor OMalley, and thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I believe that's all for colleagues. We may have some others joining us as the time progresses. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the maker, Councillor Edwards, for her work and partnership here. As I mentioned at the last council meeting, I'm somewhat of an accidental council president. Our council president is, of course, acting mayor, and I stepped into this role at the end of March and will be serving out for as long as the acting mayor is the acting mayor. And one of the first things that I did, as many of our colleagues know, and I think Councillor Wu deserves credit really for being an incredibly effective council president, is one of the first things I did was just meet individually with each and every member of central staff to make sure that they know how valued they are, how important the work they're doing, and particularly during this challenging year of a pandemic. I think that everyone worked exceptionally well and agree that we want to make sure folks feel supported. And to the maker's point, I think that this is a good opportunity to just check in on what our policies, procedures are, see how we can make them stronger, see how we can make them better. And that's precisely what we will do. We will do, through this hearing and likely beyond, as Councillor Bach said, is doing a deep dive of some of the things. Just brief conversations with Councillor Edwards. I know there's already some verbiage and some terminology and some, heretofore established rules that are problematic that we just want to strengthen and make better. So I am welcome the collaborative approach and spirit that all of us take to this work, and look forward to making things better. So, Councillor Edwards, I'm gonna, although chairing it, wanted to sort of give you an opportunity. It's very disappointing that HR has not joined us, and I'm not sure. Did we want to go to our staff director, Lady Valdez, to sort of begin with any statement?
That makes sense to me.
I may have frozen.
You did freeze, but I hear you. Okay. Oh, you're unfrozen.
Okay.
And off screen. Okay. So it might make sense, yes, for Lady to talk a little bit about the procedures as we understand them. And then just to walk through, so both angles, if you will, Lady. If there's a concern about performance from central staff from the counselor, what a counselor traditionally should do and would do if they have a concern about central staff. And then if you could walk through if central staff or staffers have concerns or issues about a counselor or another staffer, what is the procedure for them to protect them if they're concerned.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am Julie, I'm Central Staff Director, and to answer your question, Councillor Edwards, usually the normal procedure, if a central staffer or any staff members has a concern, they will go to the staff director or the president's office directly if they choose to. Depending on what the complaint is, then that's how we would proceed. If it's something internal, performance-wise, it is addressed with the president's office and the central staff director. If it's something more like sexual harassment complaint, then that's when we will elevate it to the Human Resources Department.
Okay. And then if I can I use you as an example? So there's no,
yeah.
Okay. Let's just say I am not happy with the performance, or I found something incorrectly done by you. What do I do as a supervisor? And I think it's clear we must iterate to everyone. You as the staff director and central staffers have 13 supervisors, each one of us, correct?
Yes.
So how do we as supervisors supervise?
It will go straight to the president's office. Let's see, if you have a problem with me as the staff director, you have a right to go straight to the president's office, who chairs the rules committee, and then we'll take it from there if it's performance-wise. That's how I've always understood the process.
And by taking it from there, you mean, does it go in front of the rules committee?
That's depending on what the issue is. If it's something that, performance-wise, it could just be a conversation, coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. If it's something more serious in the past, it goes to rules, usually through executive session, because personnel matters are confidential.
Okay. And do you think that there could be, or we could move and to clarify and make sure those processes are a little bit more solidified in some of the rules? And I don't know if you would be willing to work with us to help make sure they are.
Of course, I'm willing to work to always protect the workers and to work with all the counselors to make sure that we have something in place that is clear and moving forward.
So, and my other question is, what is difficult for me is HR's recent statement that they have nothing to do with our internal policies, but they've testified on family leave in 2016 that Councillor Wu was part of doing. They've testified on the sexual harassment policy in 2018. They're named as the place, and you just said that they're named as the place or the entity to go to after it's elevated. But their recent communication to our office was that they have nothing to do with our HR. And is that your understanding?
It is a little bit of a complicated relationship because we are not technically a department, but we do not have an HR department within the council. So we still fall and we still rely on the City of Boston's Human Resources Department for a lot of things. When it comes to internal policies, maybe they weren't clear on which policy we were going to talk about here. When it comes to our own retaliation, harassment, discrimination policy, that's unique to the council, but it's also modeled after the City of Boston, the City of Boston's policy. So they may not be clear on which policy we're talking about, maybe. And I'm happy to reach out to them.
Well, no, you have always been, and that's not a question. I think the question for me is prompted by when they have been involved and not been involved in crafting some of our policies, in dealing with certain investigations, and all of these different things. There seems to be an amorphous place where they are, and I am frustrated by that. Because I believe if workers don't have clear lines of how this goes forward and how I'm protected, if I have the strength to come up against an elected official to say that they've done me wrong, I think clarity, consistency, and knowing where HR is or isn't going to be is vital to that. And so I'm hearing that they're not part of this. I'm seeing that they have been part of crafting policy. They're listed as a place to go. We think we can elevate to them. And again, the frustration that they're not here today, for me to ask specific questions about what they've done in the past, if they've done investigations, what kinds of investigations, who they have involved, if they've involved city councilors, if they've involved staff, they're not here to answer that questions. And so, as I said, if I leave here with more questions than answers, I'll just put this all in a 17F. I don't expect you, Lady, to have to answer those questions for them. I think you're trying your best to try and cover for them a little bit. But the fact is, we need clarification from them. Otherwise, our workers are not protected, I feel.
Understood.
Thank you. Those are my questions right now, Councillor O'Malley. And then I do have marked up sections where it doesn't have to happen today, but as you mentioned, there's parts of the rules in central staff, the harassment policy that I've marked where I think we need to do some updates.
Yeah, no, agreed. No, I appreciate that. We'll get back to that, Councillor Edwards. I'm getting the line that my connection is unstable. I'm actually in the office next to you, Councillor Edwards, so I might just come in and join you if that's okay, if this continues to freeze up.
Water's fine.
Well, I'll get through this route and then maybe I'll join you. But I think it's an interesting point that you raise, and Jalady, I think is it safe to say that in addition to being our incredible staff director, you also are kind of serving as a de facto HR head for the entire central staff team?
Yes, that is correct. In 2018.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I'm not. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was.
No, what you started to say in 2018?
Yes, in 2018, when the council was drafting the policies for the sexual harassment, discrimination, it was determined that the point of contact should be somebody in central staff because the council president's office changes every so often. And people might not feel comfortable going straight to the elected official to raise a concern about, a serious issue like this. So it was determined that it should be done by the central staff director, we should have that responsibility, whoever is in this role.
Yeah. To your knowledge, has there ever been, has central staff, I know central staff is sort of grown and shrunk through the years. Has there ever been a HR person just for central staff that would not only serve central staff, but also the individual counselors' offices as well?
It will be,
do you know?
It will be a human resource liaison, personnel officer liaison, and that will be the business manager.
Okay, so for those, so that would be Lorraine Scatino is currently our business manager. You were the business manager before being central staff director. So that person would serve. I mean, I guess that's interesting because for those that are watching, this is a little bit about how the sausage is made. Is that whomever is council president, which changes every 2 years, or in this case, twice in 2 years. The central staff director would report to the council president. Having that sort of fluid position and also the inherent political nature of our jobs wouldn't necessarily engender a high degree of confidence that a councilor could serve as sort of the HR liaison for the body. So having someone in central staff like the business manager does make sense. But again, these are the questions that we need the clarity, to Councillor Edwards' point, where we need HR here to discuss things with us, because I think we're all trying to get at the same thing, which is how do we have better, stronger, more supportive policies in place. But there's some real sort of legal questions and uncertainty about what the chain of command is. And it's further sort of made harder by the fact that inherently there's going to be tensions between the mayor, who appoints the HR director, and the councilors at times. So that can be sort of an added thing. So I guess this is my long way of saying, should we have a consideration about possibly bringing in an HR professional to serve in that capacity? I don't know that the budget would allow it this time, but is this sort of a long-term solution we should be discussing? No need for feedback. You're welcome to comment if you wish, but I guess I'm kind of thinking out loud at this point, because I do want to make sure that folks feel supported. And I feel like almost as a body, the council is kind of left behind in some of these discussions and deliberations. So that's all I have. I'm going to actually probably join you, Councillor Edwards. I'm going to throw to Councillor Arroyo next, and then Councillor Braden after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you ladies really the only one here for questions. So I'm going to ask you some of these questions, but if you don't have the answers to some of these questions, that's fine. And obviously, I think, I think this is one of the reasons why Mr. Chair was trying to be careful with when you said 2018. HR cases are protected by law. So it's not like they can just come in here and start saying, we did these investigations on these people these many times. Like, that's all protected by literally state law on worker rights and HR personnel files. So I'm not trying to ask you directly about personal investigations. That's why I'm asking you this. I'm more interested in how we manage the fact that somebody has to assess the work. And since I've been here, that has not happened. And we've had some situations that I think truly call for an assessment of that work. In terms of how that happens, I know historically that has happened in the Rules Committee. You know that your predecessor, was terminated. So there's been situations where people have been terminated. I guess the question is there any regularized format for reviewing performance? Do we have anything like that for central staff?
it's not something that is written, let's say that it has to be done every certain amount of time. It changes, with the precedent that we get every couple of years. We have done performance evaluations. To my, in the time that I've been here, it was done with Councillor Wu as a department-wise, I would say, and it was done by all the councillors. They had input, and
Can you just tell me what that looked like? Was that a hearing? Was that a private session? Was that like
it was private. It was private. It was something that was sent to all the councillors, maybe like a Google form or something like that. Maybe council can speak more about that because I wasn't in this role when that happened, so I don't recall all the details. The other thing is that since you started, we got hit with COVID-19, and it was something that it was in the works, but that totally changed our course of action in 2020. So we were kind of on survival mode and just making sure that everything was running. So we didn't do any performance reviews, but we did have our one-on-one sessions with the council president, and any issues that will come up, we will handle it then.
But there was no input for, as we noted, they have 13 supervisors. There was no input from any of the other 12. It was just the city council president directly reviewing one person's work or talking to somebody about their work.
In 2020?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just directly with the council president if there were any issues that were arising that needed to be addressed. Like I said, COVID just really changed a lot of things.
And so I guess as I understand it, what it sounds like is we don't have, and I think we probably should have, some regularly scheduled time frame or process for allowing councilors to both note excellent performances and performances where they think there should be more review or more discussion. And it sounds like we don't have that. Is it accurate to say we do not have any sort of regular or normal process for which city councilors can sort of regularly say it's that time of the year where we review performance? That sounds like we don't have that, correct?
Not a standardized process, no.
Okay, and then I have one other question. I have my own personal staff. As you know, all the city council has their own personal staff, and they serve very much at my pleasure, right? If I wanted to let a staffer go or hire a staffer, I could just do that. That's kind of the power of all of us with our offices. When it comes to that, there's things that I have institutionalized in my office that people know as rules. For instance, you can't engage in behavior in public or in any way, shape, or form that could be construed as racist or sexist or any of these type of things, because that reflects on the office. And so we have these policies regarding sort of how you engage in public. Does the city council central staff have any policies on, say, engaging in racist behavior or any of that, like a zero tolerance on any kind of racist behavior or sexist behavior or any kind of issue with, sort of things that could be termed as civil rights, attacking any individual like protected class?
Yes, that will fall under our Boston City Council policy on discrimination, sexual and other forms of harassment and retaliation. It outlines that.
So my question is, does that only apply, that rule, does it only apply to how they interact within central staff and with councilors, or does that apply to how they interact outside of the office in public in any way, shape, or form?
I believe it says, hold on, if I can quote it here. There is a section that says it's not limited to the workplace. It includes behavior outside and outside of city premises as well. So
if a central staffer violated that and engaged in behavior that was racist in a public place, and a councilor was aware of that and wanted to address that, what would be the method in which they would have to do that?
Well, it would be addressing it with the central staff director first.
So it would be to call you.
Or the council president.
Okay, and then after and so this is the thing, that to me isn't addressing it, that's notifying of a problem. When we're trying to address it, now that we've notified you or made you aware of a problem, what is the next step to actually address that issue? Is it a zero tolerance situation? Because as you know, or I would assume you know, the councilors have to vote to hire and they also have to vote to fire, I believe, central staff. And so the question is, what happens after you become aware? Is it something that gets dealt with internally? Do the councilors then all have to take part in some kind of, and maybe Councilor Wu might be helpful on this in terms of her past practice as city council president, but how would you address an issue if I brought you an issue that said this is a central staffer engaging in racist behavior, here you go, here's this, and then you took that, what is the next step after notification? That's the process I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, so once again,
And Councillor Arroyo, I apologize. Councillor Arroyo, I don't know if we sent this, if you have the 2018 policy in front of you. And this is why we're having this great conversation, because I don't think it's clear and good enough, but it does have complaint procedures listed in it for violation. So there's a notification section.
Yep.
Pages aren't numbered, but there's a notification section, then it has complaint procedures. Once a councilor, chief of staff, staff director, supervisor is notified of an incident, it must be reported to Office of Human Resources, at which point the City of Boston will promptly begin an investigative procedure as outlined in the City of Boston's discrimination, harassment, and retaliation policy. And then this is again where I don't think that's good enough, Councilor Arroyo. I'm just saying it is in there though, that an employee, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So I see that, like I'm looking at it as
Okay.
so I'm on a computer, I see it right next to me. My thing about this is, right, like this is where it gets back to like making it more clear. When we have central staff, when they're even our own staff. So for instance, all of our own staff are hired after a vote by the council. So nobody gets hired either to our own personal staffs or the central staff without a vote by the council. And my understanding is, even though I can let go of my own staff, central staff cannot be fired except by vote of the council. And so when we have a situation like this, where, for instance, in my office, and I assume in most people's offices, if somebody were to act in a racist manner, they would be fired immediately. There's a question here as to what that process, like an HR investigation would happen, I guess, is what I'm trying to figure out. If there was something that was brought forward that said this is racist behavior, and because you're the staff director, I'm gonna just use staff director as a person, like staff director, here you go, or city council president, here you go. Are they mandated to take this next step, or is that a decision that gets made, or like what happens at that point is basically what I'm saying. Because if it's say like a video of somebody engaging in racist behavior that comes to our attention, do we really need to send that for an investigation if we just have it and it's available to us? And I'm trying to figure out, in terms of like the process, if somebody did that outside of the work environment, I don't know of any. Maybe this is where it would have been helpful to hear from HR. I don't know how HR deals with a racism like complaint. Like I don't know how many they fielded. I don't know if that I'm allowed to know that in terms of like HR policy. But I would love to know how that gets addressed and how we would address it, because I would assume that the council would want a zero tolerance policy on that. And so what I'm trying to say is I don't see anything here that specifically says what would result if you engage in that behavior. Only that there would be a notification and sort of an investigation, and then we find out if that investigation says this happened or this did not happen. But I don't see anything that says, and then the next step is we do this, this, and this, and this, right? Do you see what I'm saying?
So, Councilor Arroyo, it's Councilor OMalley. I'm now sharing the screen with Councilor Edwards because I have red for Wi-Fi. The last sentence of that complaint procedures reads, any employee of the council who is found after an investigation to have violated this policy will be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination. But I think.
So what I'm getting at, so I appreciate that. Thank you. But what I'm getting at is it's sort of, that's a big thing, right? Like it could be a private, don't do that again, or it could be you're fired. Like that, the scope of that is so wide, and we don't clarify really what determines whether or not we are going to make it, say, a reprimand or a personal reprimand or a written reprimand, to use language, for instance, with the bar and how they do things, or if it's literally a termination, right? Like we don't really clarify what and how that would be determined. And I think, and this is why I'm getting back to like the Rules Committee role in this, I think part of this is that we're allowed to, in the Rules Committee, have executive sessions where we can discuss personnel files. Like this is all public and the press can hear this. So like we wouldn't discuss an individual's personnel information here. Like we wouldn't do that. And so if we were going to meet as a council to discuss what an appropriate measure should be on somebody, what is the procedure for that? Does the city council president just make that up on their own? Do the city councilors, who are all supervisors of this individual, have a say? How is that conducted? Is it an executive session where it's private and we protect the rights of that individual because it's a private executive session and not a public hearing like this? What is the process for determining that, is what I'm saying? Is it an individual, like now you're council president. So if that got to you, does Council President O'Malley get to individually determine by himself what the response to that is? Or do the councilors get to chime in? If they do, how do we not violate open meeting law to do that, which I believe is rules committee and executive session. And so that's the stuff I'm trying to get to, is how do we get.
I think it's a really good point, and it underscores, I think, what we hope to come out of this. Further underscores the fact that it would be great if HR joined us, if nothing else, just to offer some clarity. And is thirdly underscored by the fact that we're in this position where the council president is Kim Janey, the acting mayor. I am the council president pro tem. So does that change things? I've taken over for role of the rules committee, but I think it underscores what we're trying to get at. I'm going to, if it's all right, Councilor Royal, I just want to call on Councilor Wu, because I know as a former council president, she might have some info on this as well, and then we'll get to Councilor Braid. So Councilor Wu, if you want to jump in.
I thought you, lady, were you signaling to say something more directly first? Go for it. I'll go after.
What I was going to say is that every case is different. So that's why it's not something that is written clear. Oh, if this happens, it's going to be a determination, because it's on a case by case basis. And that's the severity of the case. That's all I wanted to say.
I absolutely agree with that. I will add that just the point that was brought up about what the role of the rules committee is relative to the full council, relative to personnel decisions on central staff, there had not been clear standards and guidelines for that as of, the policy here describes a sort of subset of those types of decisions and offers guidelines. But beyond this, the set of sort of triggers for that policy, as well as prior to this policy being in effect, I think there's always a gray line about how much the council president was able to sort of had the responsibility to enact on their own. And I think some measures that we put in place in terms of setting precedents that I believe were helpful and impactful for guiding the council with regards to the shared resources and shared talents of central staff were to very much insist that we had consensus among all 13 colleagues, or to the extent that we could assess that consensus relative to major central staff personnel decisions, both in the hiring as well as in termination and disciplined conversations, where the tools of being able to use executive sessions that have documented transcripts and minutes and votes taken to have the council president carrying out the will and the consensus of the entire body is very important, so that it's not just sort of one person taking action relative to individual staffers, individual colleagues, et cetera. And having that precedent, I think, is reflected to the extent that it can be in this document, but even in other cases beyond this set of triggers around discrimination, when there are other measures that trigger investigations or these types of conversations, finding a way where we can insist that that is upheld, I think would be in the best interest of the council as a whole.
So I'll get to Councilor Braid, but I'm sorry, this is less of a formal hearing, more of a working session as it's unfolding. But Michelle, I'm curious, what would you think? What would you suggest would be a good approach to sort of revisit some of these rules or get better clarity? Is it literally the rules committee trying to rewrite them? Is it working? Councilor Edwards had mentioned about looking at sort of contracting out with some HR specialist to sort of help us craft them better. What would be your sort of take as someone who, again, I think served incredibly well and effectively as president?
I think to the extent possible, we should mirror
the general procedures that City Hall HR is implementing, where they are already documented and in writing. So I would humbly suggest that the first step should be to get from them, if not sort of attendance at this conversation, which is where we would have wanted to start, but the actual documents for what their steps are when it comes to similar situations. And then to have some subcommittee or interested counselors take a look at how those should be potentially redrafted or amended to reflect the unique situations that we're in, and then present that back to the Rules Committee for discussion. I think we're all coming at this from different places, but it's really helpful to have specific language to think about, so we're not kind of pulling random anecdotes and worst case scenarios into the conversation.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Councillor Braden, the floor is yours.
No, I welcome that this is more of a working session than a formal hearing as such. I think the complexity. I think the fact that we have 13 councillors who essentially the central staff have to report to makes it a very complex and difficult terrain. So having a consistent set of rules that are recognised, I think the notion that we might have procedures that would mirror what human resources is, so we have a consistent approach across the whole platform, so to speak, that would help clarify, and then it would there'd be less ambiguity about where people stand and what rules apply in each different situation. So I think getting a better handle on what their procedures would be helpful, I think. And again, this is unknown terrain for me, so I bow to your greater experience, you folks who've been working on this issue before. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Michelle, you're next in the queue, but since you just went, if you want to, we'll go to Councillor Bach. The floor is yours, Kenzie.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely would second Councillor Wu. I think pulling the OHR docs from the city and figuring out what they've got, and I mean, recognize it, and then figuring out if it works for us and if we need other models as well. I mean, I can think of a number of agencies that we could get model docs from. Would make a lot of sense. I guess I was wondering whether this might actually be a question for you, Councillor OMalley. Just looking at the date on the last handbook, it's 2013 October, which is, I think, actually about a month before Councillor Wu won her initial election. So I was wondering if you remembered what sort of did we have a book before this? Was this the first? Was this the first one that the council put together? Do you know if it was based on any model docs at the time? Do you have any of that history?
Sorry. So it's funny, I was thinking that would have happened under, I was certainly a councillor then, it would have happened under Council President Murphy, who was pretty good on, he would convene the committee on the rules. We're gonna do a new vaudeville act, Lydia and I, doing sharing Zoom screens. By the way, whoever wants my office next year, the view is great, but the Wi-Fi is terrible. So Councillor Murphy would often, which is one thing that I hope to do and have begun, convening the Rules Committee on a whole host of topics. So it could have been rules like this. It could have been sort of looking at tweaks to the council rules. I don't specifically remember this. I think he may have impaneled a smaller group, which is what he would often do. And I think Councillor Wu did as well. I don't know if any other council president did, but when there was an opening for a central staff position, quite often you'd have the council president panel 3 or 4 councillors, or usually an even number, to sort of interview the candidates, and then put forth names. And I believe that that's probably what happened with this, and I wasn't one of the councillors chosen to work on it because I don't know that for certainty, but I would assume that would have been the approach, which isn't a bad one, but again, 8 years ago is a lifetime, and these things should probably be updated every 2 years. So that's certainly one thing that I'd like to come from this, to your point, to the sponsor's point, to Council President Emerita Wu's point, like just having a sort of fresh set of eyes and some better inline language with what the city is. But I'm fairly certain that's how we got to the 2013 document. Murphy probably convened a rules committee sub-working group to put these before the body.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's helpful. And if, and maybe we can figure out just what process they use. I mean, I think regardless, it's pretty obvious what we want is just to pull all the docs together and think about best practices. Councillor Wu, do you remember from your presidency, I mean, were there particular sort of major steps forward that you felt like we took on this, or any beachheads we didn't quite reach that we should be focused on now?
I think I was trying to allude to this a little bit earlier, that some mechanism of tying in compensation to this conversation is important as well, because it often just can be forgotten in the, often when the city council president takes over, it's such a quick turnaround to when that council president has to approve and or propose changes to the mayor's proposed departmental budget, that given the timing of how all that happens, that the cost of living increases and changes to compensation for central staff may or may not get into there in that early shuffle. And so then it often becomes a second year, sort of the second half of the term conversation. And by that point, it's sort of, it comes down to the will of one person and whether they're going to put that into the budget or not. It should be much more documented and just have clear frameworks for how that happens. And because there is no collective bargaining unit and agreement, that this is important. We have standards across the board.
Yeah, it seems to me like we would almost want to push that into being a fall thing that council presidents did. So you were basically setting up, so your successor would have sort of the memo already written in terms of the budget ask. Because that definitely, I think, I know this year, obviously, we were glad as a council to advocate for and successfully get an increase for central staff. But that was all a belated post-budget introduction process for exactly the reason that you described. So it seems to, and I think, obviously, many of us, not to tie everything together, but many of us are advocating for the charter amendment. And if that passes, one of the things in general that I think the council with sort of additional budget powers will need to do is to shift its sort of creative budget advocacy earlier in the process in general, since departments are submitting their draft budgets in January within the administration's process. So so it seems like this would be another thing where if we had why have the new person who's just figuring out the role figure it out in the opening weeks if their predecessor could just do it in the October, November time. I don't know. That's helpful.
Yeah. And with, I think the bigger sort of one step back equivalent of that is salary adjustments to the different classifications and who belongs to which one, and in terms of what the roles are, and having the performance evaluations already in place and done by then is, I think, makes then the compensation adjustment conversation a lot more grounded in data and a lot smoother. But then it's just, you have to build in that chunk of time as well.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor OMalley, Councillor Edwards. I don't really have any questions other than the fact that I just wanted to echo what Councillor Wu and Councillor Bach said, is having some type of consistent way of making sure that central staff receive a pay increase or a COLA. And I'm glad that we were able to do it this time, but something scheduled where every year or every 18 months or so that these employees will know that they're going to get a raise. I'm concerned that when we don't pay people a decent wage and when we don't increase their salary, they'll often look at other possible job opportunities, and we're losing a lot of that institutional knowledge if that inexperience if that happens. So I think it's important, and I'm glad this body is doing it. I'm so glad this body is doing it, but just consistently making sure that people receive a cost of living adjustment and or a pay raise in a consistent manner is what I want to kind of provide my colleagues with in terms of steps going forward. So hope that is helpful, Councillor O'Malley and Councillor Edwards.
Certainly is. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Appreciate that. Echo it. I'm going to turn it over to the author and my Zoom mate, Councillor Edwards.
So I think what we're seeing, honestly, is that there is a confusion. There is not clarity, and having clarity is a matter of due process and predictability, and it shouldn't change depending on who's the city council president. It shouldn't change based off of who is, whether it's a councillor that is the perpetrator or a councillor that's the victim. We need consistent policies. And before I get into some of the areas where I think that our policies are falling short, I do want to make very clear the goal of this, what I want to see come out of this, whatever future conversations. I want to make sure that there is no question that when there is a concern about a central staffer, again, the central staffers that have 13 supervisors, that concern is vetted, that person is given due process. And I think the Rules Committee is the appropriate way to do that, to make sure all supervisors are informed of the concern. All supervisors can weigh whether that is a valid concern. What makes me upset may not make Councillor Bach upset or Councillor Braden. What I define as something that is a racist or sexist or whatever may not be fit within the definitions of other people. And it is worth the vetting of us to have that conversation with one another. I don't think there should be ever a direct way to bring or hold one person accountable by virtue of me finding or thinking that they have done something inappropriate. I want to be clear about that. I do think that there should be a method, a step down, the evaluation process, all of that to be built into our infrastructure to make sure that our standards are clear and how we're evaluating them. On the flip side, I actually think if a central staffer has the strength to come out against or file a complaint against a city councilor, I want that to be as efficiently moved to a power center as far away from this body as possible. And that means including the city council president. I do not believe that person should be handling any issues that, especially if their colleagues are accused of creating a hostile harassment work environment in any way, shape, or form. I want it gone out of this body. And I won't accept rules that don't do that and don't make it very clear. The frustration is that HR isn't clear as to whether they will be receiving those complaints or not. But I want, because I believe, again, these workers are uniquely vulnerable. They have no other place to go. We are not. So when we're coming after or going after and pointing out something, I think we should make it clear, and that person should have a back and forth. If they're coming after one of us, they need to be protected from day one. The retaliation is real. The retaliation is hard, and it's hard enough to come forward. I've represented enough workers who are alone, workers who work in people's homes. The power dynamics are enough to silence not just them, but other workers that work around them. I don't want that culture here. And also HR needs to be here. And again, I hate to be so flippant of their work, but this is real cute. They are involved in investigations, sort of, sometimes, maybe not. And I want to know what they are. And I think we should know what they are. And they should be clear about that. I do understand that active investigations, if they're fact-finding only, and it's done for fact purposes only, the case law is very clear. That is not protected by attorney-client privilege. That's why my 17F will be coming out specifically on certain concerns and complaints filed that HR seems to be involved in or not involved in or canceling. And I don't appreciate it. But in that back and forth and that football that we put people through, these are people's lives, their mental health, their emotional health that we are putting them through, even if you're the accused or you were the accuser. And without having clear, structured back and forth and understanding how people get due process and actually get redress, we're a lesser body, we're an embarrassed body, we're a hypocritical body unless we provide those things. Now, just to point out some of the things that we need to be looking at. In our harassment policy, it states under complaints and procedures, it says up to like disciplinary action up to and including termination. Well, if we are involved in this and we can be held accountable by this, none of us can technically be fired. I think the language should be assured that there's up to, including termination, censure, and then adding in the section from our city council rules that discusses 2/3 majority removing any one of us for actions unbecoming of a councillor. But I want that as part of the step ups that are also potentially levied against people who are doing harassing or racist actions. I also want to make sure that, and that's just in our harassment policy. In another group of things or concerns that I have is in the city council rules. That's for October 2013, just outdated language. For example, the pregnancy maternity policy, just let me read what it says right now. Whenever a female employee shall become pregnant, she shall furnish the staff director with a certificate from her physician stating that her date of delivery. So prove you're pregnant. And then she may continue to work so long as her physician certifies she's able to do so. Not only prove that you're pregnant so you can get maternity leave, but then make sure your doctor gives you permission to keep working. That is horribly out of date. Horribly out of date. And it obviously doesn't include paternity leave. The term we use now is parental leave, and it's out of date. So those kinds of things that we would let that happen or let that continue is one of the other reasons why I'm having a call for this hearing. I also do think that we need to make sure that we have not just updated the policies. I'm looking for my last or a couple other sections I have concerns about. What does an investigation involve and who pays for it? I wanted that to be clear, and the ability for either city council to call for the investigation, or if HR calls for the investigation, how much notification should they be providing the city council, especially if a councillor or a staffer or any person is part of that investigation. That needs to be clear and made public. It's public dollars we are spending. And I wanted to also note some of the rules that we might consider also adding in our actual city council rules on page 14. That Committee on Rules and Administration, some of the rules, again, this could change based on the city council president, but the definition of that committee, I think also needs to be very clear that that committee is also the committee for human resource or human workers issues of central staff. Because it's not clear based on our committee structure where everything goes, or as clear as it could be. So these are just some clarifying points. These are some outdated points. And I am what my goals are, I want to know that the workers have a beeline to help. And that if we are concerned about one of the central staffers, that we have a process put in that is protective of them and allows for them to go back and forth, and for all the supervisors to be involved. So those are my thoughts. I also wouldn't oppose, honestly, potentially approving funds for an outside HR consultant to come in to gather all these different thoughts, to look at the HR policies for the city of Boston, and possibly present updated documents for all of us that hopefully last beyond any of our political careers. That might be a better use of our time. I know how hard our colleagues worked for these policies, but it's our hands that kind of made these policies a little too amorphous for us that I think we should also consider. So those are my thoughts.
Well, I appreciate that and agree with virtually everything you said. I have some thoughts, but I know Councillor Royal has had his hand raised. So Councillor Royal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of thoughts on that. One, obviously our maternity leave, like that's embarrassing. So obviously our maternity leave policies have to get changed. I'm trying to get some clarity just in terms of like, if we're trying to talk about where we send investigations, right? Like ultimately, I think Mr. Chair mentioned sort of the concern with having it through an HR that reports to a mayor because of the political sort of nature that can be behind that for any individual councillor and quote a mayor. If we create an HR position or an HR director for the city council, when you say you want it as far away from the body as possible or whatever that means, I'm just trying to figure out what that means from a mechanism of who engages at that point. Are we talking about the city council HR can't touch it because they're hired by the city council president, and that whatever they're investigating could be made by this, it could be something that involves, say, a city council president. So then are we saying that they're not allowed to do it because technically they're supervised in sort of our informal process by the city council president, or they're hired by all 13 of us? Or is it a situation where, like, I'm just trying to figure out how we would even isolate that if it's not the mayor's HR team in terms of the administration or our HR team, how you would do that. I think the second part of that is when people make complaints, they often make them in a way where they're trying to maintain some privacy, maintain some of that element of privacy for themselves. If we're just saying every time somebody requests an investigation or an investigation is conducted, we make that public, even if we don't name names or however we want to do it, there is an element of that privacy. There is an issue with privacy that we're creating, not just for the accused, but for the accuser. So that's something that I would want to figure out how we would even go about, say, figuring out, quote unquote, HR investigations or private tax dollars. They sure are. But I don't think that we make every investigation that HR for the city of Boston, for example, does on a daily basis public, nor do we do that for BPS or any of our other facilities that are departments that are doing these investigations. We don't just publicly say this week or this month we spent this much on investigations. And so I'm not sure exactly if there's even precedent for that in terms of good policy, or if that's even helpful for accusers or accusees, or however you want to put that. So that jumped out to me as well as something that's an interesting thing that I think we could look into. And then as far as the Rules Committee, I thought that the Rules Committee structure was pretty clear, to me at least. I mean, maybe we can redefine that language, but I understand the Rules Committee as to be the committee where we hear about the rules, or we structure the rules for the council, but also the place where all of the central staff administration goes to based on how it's written up. And I would say that that's the appropriate venue, in my opinion. The reason that I know this, and maybe Councillor OMalley can speak to this, because I know you're the longest, I think currently longest serving. I know that you and Councillor Flaherty have some questions about this, but you've been under multiple presidencies at this point. And I know that under Ross, for instance, Councillor Ross, when he was former Councillor Ross, when he was president, there were executive sessions and rules committee to make determinations on, say, firing or hiring or things like that, or to talk about performance. She's no longer here, but I was not on the council. I think you were, Councillor OMalley, when there was a process of replacing our staff director or our central staff director. And that was a process where there was a termination, and there was a process to that I'm not aware of. That predates me. I don't actually know what that process was, but there've been processes in the past where we've dealt with sort of hiring, firing, performance. They're just not regular, which I think is what we want to try and do, right? Like, I think we've done this in different ways, and I think we can have conversations about whether or not the ways that, say, Council President Ross did it, or Council President Wu did it, or Council President Murphy did it are the right ways to do it, or the better ways to do it. We can come up with like a good framework that we should follow, but I think we have done frameworks for how we do this. I just don't think they're regular, and they certainly shouldn't change every 2 years with council presidents. I think that's something I firmly agree with. We should have set in place protocols that whoever the city council president is, our central staff has reliance and confidence that their rules aren't going to just change because Councillor OMalley is no longer the city council president pro tempore. Now it's somebody else, so now we have new management rules. And then it's somebody else, and now we have new management rules. I think that absolutely makes sense. That should absolutely happen. And we should talk about how to do that. I think when we get into the nitty gritty of like trying to nail it down so specifically about this investigation, that investigation, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? I think that we could get lost in the trees there. And I'm glad that we have, Councillor Bach willing to jump in here and be like a big part of putting together how we structurally go about this. But I do worry about how we protect the privacy of central staff. If central staff is the opposite end of receiving a complaint, or central staff is the complainer or making a complaint, that we protect those processes and make that sure that we're ensuring the privacy that comes with HR personnel issues, right? That actually happens for both them and for whoever may be accused, whether that's a counselor or a central staffer, or I'm assuming that these rules also apply to my personal staff, just like your personal staff, if your personal staff engaged in some behavior with a central staffer, right? So I would assume, and that should be made clear, that these things also apply to that, right? There's no, if you work under the city council in any capacity, you should have these rules apply to you. But in terms of how we do that, I think there's a level to that where we do a lot of this in open conversation. But when we get into how we do sort of these disciplinary processes, I'm not aware of, and maybe Councillor OMalley, you've been here longer. I don't think we've ever discussed anybody's sort of assessment or job qualification, even when we're firing them. Like even when there's been a vote on the floor to fire somebody, I don't think that there's actually, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a presentation of sort of why, right? Like do we just do a vote to terminate or a vote to hire? There's no, generally speaking, when you've done votes to terminate, has there been like a public hearing about the reasons for that? Or do they protect that worker's sort of privacy and just terminate? Like what's the process there?
So a couple of things. I'll try to answer all the questions. I'll end with that one, but I'm going to sort of try to answer them the way you sort of phrase your comments. In terms of having an HR professional on council staff, I brought that up more of the realization that from my understanding of the makers' conversations with HR, they basically essentially said, I'm paraphrasing here, you're on your own, we don't get involved with that. My thought meaning that we need to have some sort of an HR official. I agree with you, it'd be better to have, we need an independent fair body. I think everyone agrees to that, to sort of adjudicate HR decisions. Secondly, you brought up the Ross point. I did sadly only serve with Mike Ross for 1 month because I came in late midterm for my predecessor. But I think he and most council presidents for whom I've served under, I think, have sort of used the rules committee well. And it's one thing in terms of it being a repository for councilors to both deal with internal, external issues, as well as the inner workings of the body. And we're doing that right now. We're having this. I don't believe there's been a rules committee hearing. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I don't believe there's been one in well over a year. So that's essentially what this is. So I think we're all rowing in the right direction that way. You had also mentioned, I guess the last part, and if I forgot something, you can remind me, but the last part in terms of us terminating an employee, I don't know that we've ever done that with a vote. There are certain positions on central staff director being one of them, city clerk, assistant city clerk, as you know, being other ones that they need affirmative council votes. Every central staffer and every council staffer, of course, is voted on when we go through personnel orders. I don't believe we've ever, in my time, we've never taken action of an affirmative vote when someone has left. Some individuals have left. There's been litigation sometimes as a result. But I think the point of your question is that, of course, there are protections in place as it relates to personnel decisions.
Yeah, and I think those are state laws, but so that's news for me. I thought that the way that termination, so if I'm to understand this correctly, technically, as City Council President pro tempore, you could unilaterally make a decision to release a central staffer. Is that essentially how it's worked in the past? That City Council President can literally just
I feel like there have only been a couple, and I think that it was. I'm even hesitant to get into the specifics because I think that it would be inappropriate. It's personnel and protected information, but I don't think it's quite as cut and dry that the council pres or president pro tem can just dismiss someone. I think there obviously needs to be just cause and perhaps but I don't know that, it may have gone through the rules committee. Haven't served on the rules committee that often. So that, in fact, I wasn't on the rules committee before this vote, so.
Because the reason I say that is, Councillor Edwards brings up a good point. What I find to be offensive or what I find to be something that would not necessarily be something that I would tolerate from my staff might not match what somebody else would find as a fireable offense. But if we're saying that the council president could determine, well, this is a fireable offense for me or it's not a fireable offense for me, regardless of how, say, a majority of councilors feel or whatever, then that's an interesting dilemma where if we're not voting on something, it sounds like a council president could basically make a determination, this rises to the level of termination for me, or it doesn't, sort of on their own. And if, say, Councillor Edwards or myself disagreed, we wouldn't have a recourse for that, is what it sounds like.
I don't want to give you the wrong answer, Ricardo, because I'm not entirely sure. There may have been, these two individuals I'm thinking of may have left on their own accord, but perhaps felt that they were, so I don't know the answer. I'm looking for clarity, and I will certainly follow up with you whether or not there needs to be concrete action.
So I'm less asking, just to make it more clear so we don't have to get into any personnel weirdness.
Yeah.
I'm not asking specifically about prior cases. I'm saying it sounds like as of right now, if somebody wanted, if there was a determination for central staff to be made, it sounds like the person who makes that determination pretty much is solely the person who has the city council president title, is what it sounds like. If you've never voted on a termination and that's not the procedure, then it sounds like the way somebody would get terminated is if the city council president determines that something they've done, obviously there has to be just cause, but something that they've done reaches the level of just cause for them, whoever that may be. Not if it reaches just cause for the council as a majority body.
Right. I actually don't think that that's what it says. I think, and that's what the frustration is. It seems like it's, the complaint procedures, again, it would have the counselor or the supervisor, whatever, it's reported to HR, at which point the city of Boston prompts an investigation. And this is where the language is not clear, but it says an employee of the city council who is found. It doesn't say who does the finding. It just says who is found. And I'm assuming because it's been done by an investigative procedure prompted by the HR, right? By HR.
I'm assuming when it says investigation, the investigator is the one making the finding, right? So
that's what I'm assuming, but I agree with you. I don't like that not being clear who is making the finding, and then who is making the punishing? Who's doing the disciplinary action? Is it based off of a vote that says there is a warning this time, there's going to be a firing this time, there's going to be, that is not clear at all in these policies. How this
it doesn't tell me if unilaterally a city council president can say, I want to protect, or I want to help, or this is a person I care about. So even though this reaches just cause, I'm not like, it doesn't, there's no clarity as to what the process is on how that happens. And the one thing I forgot to bring up on the parts that kind of came out of your pieces, I get uncomfortable when we talk about rule, I think it's 40A or 40B, because the courts have found that we don't actually have the ability to remove duly elected people from office, that's actually illegal. And so technically what that rule says we can do, the courts have said we cannot do. I don't even know why that rule is still on our books, to be perfectly honest with you. So when we talk about tying disciplinary records into Rule 40, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because the courts have already come back and said we don't have the ability to remove duly elected officials, even after, and in that particular case, even after a conviction of a federal crime. And so, I don't know how we would try to tie that into, disciplinary decisions in terms of language, but I'm very wary when we try to tie things to Rule 40, because Rule 40 is not a legitimate rule to me. When the courts say you don't have the power to do this, and I've read that legal opinion, it's not a rule that we can actually use. And so to continue to pretend that we could, or that it's an accurate thing that 2/3 of the body could remove a member, that's not healthy, I don't think. I think actually that's a rule that we haven't had a rules committee hearing, but if we had a rules committee hearing or a meeting, I would say that's a rule that we should be off the books because the law says it should be. But in terms of, the rest of that, that's the one thing I had a concern with that I flagged when you said, we should tie these things in. I think tying in Rule 40 that says 2/3 can remove a member, we've been judged on that by our legal system, that that's not actually something we have the power to do. And so I would have a question about,
just point of clarification. It is a potential to remove. It's not absolute. It's any action by the council taken in response.
No, I get it. I get it. But what they've said is that
no, but I want to make sure everyone else gets it.
Yeah,
it isn't just to remove. It's to that something should be, if we want to do something disciplinary towards each other.
No, I get it. But what I'm saying is, to be perfectly clear, we don't have the power to remove anybody.
Very well, Councillor Arroyo.
So saying that we should have that power doesn't mean that we do. So if you have a rule that says up to termination of, say, a city councilor, but the courts have said that's not legal, you can't do that, it doesn't make sense to even pretend that we have that power in a rule. We don't.
Right. Well, our current policy says up to termination, and I agree with you. We cannot terminate a city councilor. Can we censure? Absolutely. And I think that language should be in there.
Isn't that language in Rule 40, just to be clear, that we can basically, for breaking state law or breaking federal law, that we can actually censure? I think we put that in Rule 40.
There is parts that say that it's actions of unbecoming of a counselor, and
Which is
for
legal language,
unqualified to sit on the body. The automatic refer to no, it just has an automatic referral, and then it says any action in response. So I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think our rules, what I brought this up for, and what I said the language was incomplete, is there is no clear understanding of how to discipline or how to censure, or that is even part of the step-up process in dealing with a counselor who stepped out of line. We don't have that either.
But I think even on that, right, like this is the issue I had with, say, the rule that you could just remove the city council president, but didn't have any language determining what dictates. So for instance, accountability requires like clear rules, right? Like don't break a law, don't do this, right? So that's how you, and then you hold them accountable to that. If we created the idea that you could censure a council or a counselor, I would expect clearly expressly written language that would dictate under what circumstances that could occur. Not that like 7 people can censure somebody for any reason, but that there are specific reasons in which we allow for the censuring of a person, right? That's like the accountability standpoint of that.
Councilor Arroyo, with all due respect, I feel that for me right now, the conversations are 2 different things. The city council rules and the amendment that I proposed is one thing, and then protecting central staffers and staff members and
I'm not discussing. I'm not really discussing that. What I'm saying is, in terms of creating a rule, which is directly in what you're talking about, which is like sort of what are the consequences, what are the decisions, how we make them. If one of those things is censure, public censure by this body, it's not enough to just say we can publicly censure you. I think we have to explain what the process for a public censure has to be, or what the actual process for what qualifies for public censure has to be. And it can't be subjective. Like it can't be, you know, I feel this way, but Councillor OMalley doesn't feel this way. It should be clear-cut language. You understand what I'm saying?
So what it shouldn't be also is the city council president going to HR to investigate a counselor or essential staffer, and then ultimately selecting the damn investigator to do said investigation and then sending us the bill. That sure as hell isn't what it should be either. And that is also something I never want to see happen again. And I wish HR was here to answer those questions. But let me be clear, because of the lack of clarity, because of the lack of understanding of what is going on in this body, we have subjected some of our members to outright abuse. And I am embarrassed by it. I don't ever want it to happen again. And while I appreciate the back and forth, and I do think we absolutely need to make sure that our rules are clear, clarified, and that the step up, it's you and I are lawyers, we're about that procedure, we're about due process, we're about the notice. But I also think we need to be clear when we have messed up and when our rules have actually encouraged this kind of confusion. So I'm not disagreeing with you that there needs to be clarification around what a censure is and what discipline is for an elected person.
Yeah, certainly. And I would just say—
I'm not disagreeing with you on that.
No, I know you're not.
You asked me specifically about what did I mean that I want it out of this body. I mean, if someone has the strength to say that Lydia Edwards has sexually harassed me, I don't think my president that I voted for, right, who might be inclined to protect me, or central staffer who I control should be part of that conversation. I wanted to go to HR, which is what our policies say it should do. And I agree, you know, that yes, sometimes they are appointed by the mayor, but HR also in general sits in that unique position where it deals with all complaints from people who work for the mayor. And they need to take it seriously. They not only need to take it seriously, but they need to notify that they are taking it seriously.
Yeah, certainly. I don't disagree.
And that's not what is happening. That's not what is happening.
I agree with all of that. I think one of the issues as well that we should just be honest with about this process is when we talk about methods for evaluation and how we do that, if you call for an evaluation, if there's an issue where, say, a council president is having an issue with a central staffer, and there's a concern by that central staffer for some reason in which a process like this is violated or used in violation of sort of retaliatory process, you ask for a review of me, so I'm going to ask her a complaint on you, that kind of thing, that we're protecting both people in terms of who that may or may not be. And I agree that so for instance, and I'm sorry if I insert you this way, Councillor OMalley, because you're President Pro Temp, but if somebody made a complaint against Councillor Pro Temp OMalley, I don't think he should make the determination on how it's treated. That to me is wild, right? So like, I wouldn't say, Councillor OMalley should determine how an investigation into himself is conducted. That's wild. I wouldn't do that for myself. That's a wild way to do it. But I also think that there's a sensitivity to how these kinds of complaints get made. In fact, as Councillor OMalley has referenced, I believe that there are 2 lawsuits working their way through the system right now about those exits that happened under prior presidencies currently. And so when we talk about like complaints and how they get made, there has to be a protection on both sides about how we deal with, is this a retaliatory complaint? Is this a valid complaint? And I do not, just to be clear, I do not believe it's for the council to make a determination as to whether or not it's a valid complaint or not. I believe that should be a decision made by HR and whatever investigation happens there. But I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that after HR sees one of these, after an investigation is conducted, it may be found that that investigation found no basis or no merit to whatever that is. And if that occurs, as public officials, as people who work in public office or government office, not just us, but central staff, having the sort of public scrutiny of a public trial or something before you get a finding, like we have to be very careful about how we create rules about, say, how an investigation is conducted, who investigates it, that's fine. But when we get into like, you have to report when you're doing them and how you're doing them in a public way, you're creating a dangerous, to me, lack of protection for not just the accuser, but the accusee. And I want to be careful about when we create these sort of standards about when we can publicly censure and when we can't, those kinds of things, that we do that with very firm, not arguable, not subjective language where somebody can say, I think this is politically motivated. I think this is this, where it's just very clear what this is. And I think my one thing that I want to be like, if I finish on anything, is I want to make sure we keep, and it sounds like you do too, politics out of HR complaints, right? Like we don't, and I got that from Councillor OMalley when you talk about, the HR situation. We don't want individual politics or how somebody politically feels about somebody else to mandate or determine how a process for a complaint is processed or how a complaint gets dealt with or handled eventually, right? We want that to be as free of political bias or political sort of machinations as possible. And so for me, I think these policies definitely have to get redone. I think that they have to be redone in such a way where we're very careful that we don't insert politics into it in a way that isn't beneficial for an accuser or an accusee.
No, and I certainly am not disagreeing with that. I will say though that there is certain, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and things that happen in the dark and are happening in the dark makes for an incredibly uncomfortable, unequal, and horrible work environment.
I agree, but I will say that
I have to say that I ultimately, if a person feels that they're, if they are accused, and especially if it is an elected official, if they are accused of something, I don't think that we have the same protections or same expectations of privacy. I don't think we do.
I think we do.
I actually don't think we do. So we may disagree on that, but I'm not interested so much.
Whether or not you think we should is a different conversation, but legally we certainly do. Just like my staff, if I'm doing an investigation on my staff, that is done in the dark. You don't have public investigations into individuals unless for some reason, I think there's a handful of public investigations that city has had that have been public, and they've been public largely because it leads to a suspension or something of that nature while it's ongoing. But there's a number of investigations that have happened where the HR process for that, due to HR privacy rights from state law and all these different things, is that you don't just publicly discuss HR cases before they're handled or how they're handled. And in fact, in some of those cases, I am certain there have been disciplinary decisions made where that's not even public, because you don't then publicly, like, so for instance, the guy at Public Works or somebody like that.
No, but Councillor Rono,
I'm trying to figure out what you
and I are not, I think we're headed down a rabbit hole where
I'm trying to figure out if you're saying that the policy should be different for central staff.
Why I filed it.
No, I get why you filed it. That's clear.
No, I don't think you do. And I think that we're headed in a different direction when there was there's two things that I wanted to, again, make very clear. Accusations against us as elected officials, I see different than accusations from public officials against these particular workers. And why the difference is, and you may be correct that there's never any other public back and forth about other HR cases, about other HR workers in the city of Boston. Those workers have other protections though. They have unions. They have people who stand by them. These workers do not.
They're not all union. But
they don't. You're right. They're not all union. But they have more protections.
We're not union. What I'm telling you though is I fundamentally disagree that, say, Councillor OMalley's privacy rights in terms of an HR complaint would be different than a central staffer's privacy rights. I think they both have privacy rights. I think that neither one of their privacy rights should be violated. So when you're saying that Councillor OMalley or Councillor Edwards or Councillor Bach or Councillor Arroyo have lesser privacy rights on an HR matter than a central staffer, I think that does two things. It ignores the idea that that's not, for me, that's not true. But two, and by state law, that's not true. But two, that there's a level of privacy that we would want to maintain for the accuser, even if an accuser came forward and said, unless they came forward publicly or something like that. But if an accuser is basically going through the personnel policy or the personnel protocols and they're making a private complaint, if there's some way which in that then becomes a public complaint because of who they're accusing, you're doing a disservice to that person, is what I'm saying. It's a two-way street. If something becomes public on one end, it becomes public on the other. And that's not always like, that's the same deal. It's the same protections. That's why the protections are uniform across the board, because if you make something
okay, Councillor Royal, I'm just gonna hop in here. I appreciate this. The purpose of this hearing is orders for a hearing to review central staff policies, procedures, performance, and regulations. I think we've touched upon a number of issues that are important and warrant further discussion, but I just want to bring us back to what's before us today. It's been not quite 2 hours, about an hour and 45 minutes. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I will not be adjourning this hearing. I will be recessing it for the purpose that we will continue the conversation. I think there are some key takeaways that we've all highlighted that deserve further conversation and review. One is a better understanding of our council rules as it relates to the rules committee specifically. The more important thing is updating the policies that were last done in 2013. And I think that I'll be looking to work with several members to try to perhaps put a smaller working group together that will then convene at the reconvened rules committee hearing on this. But I think this is an opportunity that is unique. I am the Council President pro tem. I am not seeking re-election. I will be serving out through November or for perhaps beyond that, depending on what happens in the mayor's race. I, through the work of many members of this body, was able to negotiate an increase in our central staff budget. So this will allow for much needed and deserved cost of living increases, which will then, I think, dovetail nicely with a better review process and better opportunities for rewarding some exceptional work, I would say, across the board for our central staff during this pandemic. So the work continues. I did want to give if any colleagues have any brief closing statements to make before I recess, please do so now. Otherwise, I want to turn it over to Councillor Edwards for the last word. Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, so I look forward to a working session. I think I talked about several themes on the documents as they exist that we need to address. I still think it would be great to have possibly an outside consultant and consider allocating some of our funds to bringing someone in there neutrally. If we don't have a permanent body or person here dealing with it, at least that person can construct and deal with these certain areas that need to be filled in, need to be clarified. And I want to make sure again that we ultimately my goal is to present new rules for this body to adopt that do make the processes very clear, wherein again a central staffer or a staff member, if they are being held accountable, which is what supervisors do, that it's very clear that it goes to the rules committee and that there's a public process for that accountability. And that if they are holding one of us accountable, that they are able to do so in a way that protects them, and also make sure that it is not deliberated by this body, because I don't believe that we should be, the president or anyone else, and that that we provide a process for that place to land and be deliberated, however it may finish.
Great. So again, one of our excellent central staffers reminded me that I shouldn't recess this hearing. I actually should adjourn it, and then we can schedule another hearing or working session afterwards. So we are now closing docket, excuse me for 1 second, docket 0504, order for a hearing to review central staff policies, procedures, performances, and regulations is hereby adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you. And just to be clear on that, so we're going to have another working session or hearing? Is that the plan?
Correct.
Thank you.